So this will be the first video in a two-part series on some of the big economic effects of European exploration on the economy. So we're going to be looking at, in this video, the big economic effects of exploration on the European economy. And we kind of touched on some of this stuff in the last video about the big picture effects of exploration, kind of shifting the economic focus from Italy and Southeast Europe to Western Europe. Here we're going to kind of look at some more of these big picture effects. So all of this stuff is sometimes referred to as the commercial revolution. And the commercial revolution is basically the long shift. So this happens over a long time. The long shift from a kind of feudal agricultural economy to an economy based on trade. And eventually, this economy is going to shift to an industrial economy based on manufacturing. So we are kind of here on our journey. We'll get to here in time period 3. So basically, this is happening at the end of time period 1 into time period 2. We're going to be really focused on this trade economy. Time period 3 and 4, we'll be looking at the transition to an industrial economy. And then at the end of time period 4, kind of where we are now, we're shifting into a post-industrial economy that's more based on service rather than manufacturing. But for where we are right now, we're here. So we're kind of at the end of time period 1, shifting into time period 2, and the European economy is one that's going to be based on trade. Again, and I think we've mentioned this before, is that this, in addition to the ideas of the Renaissance and the Reformation, this also begins to challenge the old feudal order, in that people who weren't represented in the feudal system are gaining a lot of money and therefore also a lot of power. Also, it's challenging the old medieval guild system. Now, the guilds were organizations that protected workers in certain fields, and they kind of maintained order in cities by policing their own members. So cities were kind of governed indirectly through these guilds, because everyone who worked in a city pretty much had a trade, and if you wanted to be protected and helped by the guild, you had to follow the rules. So cities were really awful places, dirty, dangerous places to live, but the guilds helped to maintain order in the cities by making their members follow the rules. These guild systems started to break down. So the guild system started to break down for the same reason that the feudal system started to break down. People who weren't represented by the guilds started to make a lot of money. So the same thing that's starting to challenge the rural political and economic and social order is also starting to break down the urban social and political and economic order. And it's the idea that people who aren't in that system are gaining a lot of money and power. The biggest reason for this commercial revolution, and I apologize for this, I didn't come up with a name for it, is the price revolution. So the price revolution is a part of the commercial revolution. Again, I apologize. I had nothing to do with naming these things. But the price revolution was essentially a little bit of inflation caused by the influx of all that Spanish silver that they found in Mexico and Peru. And when I say a little bit of inflation, I mean like maybe about 1 to 1.5%. That's the amount of inflation we're seeing. So that's the inflation we're seeing as a result of the Spanish silver, which in modern economics, that's good. That might even be a little low. So this isn't economics, but let's talk just for a second about what inflation is. Inflation is, it deals with the amount of stuff your money can buy. So inflation deals with the amount of stuff your money can buy. When inflation goes up, your money buys less stuff. When inflation goes down, the opposite happens. Your money buys more stuff. And a healthy economy, a healthy modern economy, has a inflation rate of about 1 to 1.5%. That's typically normal. The problem is, before exploration, there was little, I'll even say there was not any inflation, because the amount of money was static. The amount of money in Europe was static. There wasn't any more money coming in. Stuff was coming in, and we were trading the money for the stuff, but there wasn't any new money being brought in. Now, all of a sudden, we're bringing in new money. And the new money buys stuff just as well as the money that was already there. But now we're adding to the amount of money that's in Europe. So there wasn't any inflation, or very, very little. So now we're starting to see inflation. Now, why is this a problem? For rich people, this meant that they lost money. Because the money they had now buys less stuff. So the rich people are out here, all of us, they're just losing money simply by having a lot of money. Because they can't buy as much stuff with it. The land they owned didn't produce as much money. Like, it still made the same amount of stuff, but that stuff isn't bringing in as much money as it had before. So one solution to this, and this is going to be the big topic we talk about in this video, is called the Enclosure Movement. Now, this is principally an English thing, although we do see it other places, but this is principally an English thing. We mostly see this in England, but we're going to see it other places too. And basically what enclosure means is that these rich landowners are going to buy as many little plots of land and combine them all into giant plots of land that are enclosed by fences. That's why it's called the Enclosure Movement. So you've got these rich landowners who are trying to now use the money they have to make more money, not by using the land to farm on, but now they're going to use the money they have to buy more land to make as much money as they had before. So you got these giant plots of land. So the poor landowners, or the poorer landowners, because they're still pretty rich if they own land, the poorer landowners needed money, and the rich landowners were happy to give them money in return for their land. And now these poorer landowners can now work for their richer landlord. Now, there were some pros and cons to doing this. So there are some benefits to the enclosure movement. So what this did was it made farming more efficient and effective. Because now the point of farming is to make money. That's the point of farming. Before, it was to survive. You farmed because you needed to eat. But now the point of farming is to make money. You're going to make so much food as efficiently and effectively as possible to make money. And so what you do with this is that you're going to increase the amount of food. And if we put this together with things like the potato, we're going to create so much food. So putting all of this stuff together, making farming more efficient and effective because the landowners, the rich landowners, want to try to compensate for the inflation, that they start driving a more scientific, efficient, effective mode of farming to get as much as they can out of the land, makes more food. And when we throw in things like the potato or beans or corn into the mix, we're going to create so much food that we're going to pretty much drive out, well, not poverty, but we'll drive out the famines that marked most of time period 1. So we're just not going to see those famines anymore because there's just so much food out there. This is also, I hesitate to call this a benefit, so maybe we'll start calling this stuff we'll call it a consequence. So not having people starve to death, that's definitely a benefit. These consequences are more of a gray area. One consequence of doing this is that it increases the amount or the drive to protect property rights. Which is a big deal in the idea of new monarchies. Remember, the new monarchies wanted to make sure that the people who had the money were on the monarch's side, and part of doing that was protecting the rich people's property rights. So this kind of cycles into the whole idea of new monarchies. Like, this is the reason why the rich people support the new monarchies, because they want their property rights protected, and the new monarchs say they will protect them, especially the English monarchs. So it increases the drive to protect property rights by the new monarchies. They're also going to pretty much eliminate the ability of poor people to rebel against these changes. Poor people simply can't fight both these rich landowners and the government to fight against these changes. So it kind of even further reduces the voice of poor people in this system. Before this, they had a little bit more of a voice because they owned some land. But now they don't own any land, and they're just being made poorer by this system. They're not starving to death anymore, which is a benefit. But they've also lost any sense of a political voice they had prior to this. Another way that governments used to kind of make up for the loss of money from the inflation is that governments sold noble positions. So you could buy your way into the nobility. So government sold these noble positions to rich people. This was a way that governments could make up the money they lost from inflation. This is principally a thing we see in France, although again, we're going to see this all over the place, but this is principally a French thing, like the Enclosure Movement was pretty much an English thing, although we are going to see both of these things throughout Europe. Now, these positions, these noble positions, so buying a title was really expensive. So really only the most wealthy people could do this. And these people, if you bought a title, you were called a noble of the robe. This is different from like the old nobility were called the nobles of the sword. These guys didn't like each other. The old nobility and the new nobility, they didn't like each other. The nobles of the sword, they got their titles through fighting. Like, these are your old nobility. The problem with these guys is that they didn't have a lot of money. These guys bought their titles, so they didn't have like a pedigree or a heritage, but they were really rich. So these guys had authority based on like centuries of service to the king. These guys just had money. Both are useful to the king, but they don't like each other. And the reason you bought a title, you bought titles to avoid paying taxes. You bought a title to avoid paying taxes. Having a title was a status symbol. Having a title was a status symbol, and not paying taxes was also a status symbol. So this was a way that governments could make money, even though in the long run, because they're not paying taxes, the government's going to lose money. But in the short term, they're making a lot of money by selling these titles to rich people. This is going to be one of the long-term causes of the French Revolution, which we will probably start talking about in December. But for right now, these are two of the big long-term effects of exploration. The Enclosure Movement, which is principally an English thing, and the selling of noble titles for governments to make up for the inflation, which was principally a French thing, although both of these things, as I've said, you'll see throughout Europe, they're just principally seen in these places, England and France. So in the next video, we'll take a look at how this was seen amongst the poorest people of Europe. So we've kind of looked at the effects on the rich. We'll turn our attention to the poor a little bit more in the next video. So until then, this is Mr. Nissen signing off.